Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media.
Today on Spotlight, we'll explain why St. Louis has a rich and complex election history that began in the 19th century. Plus, there's a new cell-based immunotherapy offered for melanoma. And then how the zoo is helping animals all over the world and why you can help too just by visiting the zoo. But first, why you'll see beautiful murals all around the Delmar Loop. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
Really, this is just the beginning.
If you take a drive through the Delmar Loop, you will notice it looks a lot different these days. Over the past 5 months, some beautiful street art is commanding attention. It's hard to miss.
You can come down to the Delmar Loop and you will see artists all over the area, revitalizing this area, adding some electricity, some paint, some imagination, and to really help bring the Delmar Loop and to bring it back to the level that it was previously, pre-COVID.
The idea for the Loop Mural project has been in the works for about 5 years. It all kicks off with a festival that's held the weekend after Memorial Day, but the project continues year-round.
Something that you'll also see coming up this November and December is in the vacant window and some of the vacant spots in U-City, you will see some of the different murals from other artists, some of their products that we're going to put in the window, some information about them, and QR codes, how you can connect with the artists.
For the first year of the project, artists were selected from all over the map.
So our furthest the artist came from is Japan. She's currently living in New York. That's Shiro.
Shiro One collaborated with Maria Two Fly Castillo, who hails from Ecuador. Both women traveled to St. Louis to create this mural, along with St. Louis-based artist Norm Forever. For their project, the 3 women collaborated virtually at the start.
Once we kind of decided on a theme, decided on a color palette, I started mine a little bit early so I could get like the clouded background on, so to make sure that everything would be really continuous for all 3 of us.
According to Norm, all 3 artists share a feminine style, using lots of pink and turquoise. That made it easy to marry their styles together into this 3-panel mural, which looks like it could have been created by a single artist.
I know that they both paint these really amazing characters. And so I thought that if mine, I'm more of an abstract artist, and if mine still kind of fit in with the feminine nature of theirs, but at the same time still kept my artistic integrity, I thought it would be a really good mesh.
Norm Forever describes herself as a street and graffiti artist. She's originally from Texas, but now calls St. Louis home. Her work can be seen all over the country.
Through this type of creation, public art, you really can see an impact within different communities, and so you can feel that what you're doing is good.
Art inspires people. It brings smiles to their faces a lot of the time, and it's just kind of fun and whimsical, especially when you have big murals out on a street where, whether you're driving down Delmar or walking down Delmar, to be able to see these colors and these designs, it's wonderful.
Kababi Bayak grew up in the area, but is an internationally known visual artist and illustrator. He's been creating colorful works inside many local businesses for decades, but he has also created close to 40 murals in recent years.
Seeing everybody who was going to potentially do something on the wall, Maya was the theme, so didn't even dawn on me to think of anything different. And she needs presence in the city, so yeah.
Chances are you have seen some of Kababi's work in and around the St. Louis area, but he has also created artwork for some legendary recording artists, including Prince, who used Kababi's artwork as the cover for his 23rd studio album. Kababi has also created artwork for the Violator Volume 1 album.
Oh, with social media, yeah, I get hit all the time. It's either this one, the one on Illinois side on the highway. I get hit a lot by that one, so yeah. People are always sending me messages.
From this to this. Shortly after our taping, Kababi completed the second part of his mural on Maya Angelou.
I just tell people you got to follow your passion and let that be the guide. Don't worry about who likes it and who doesn't like it, because you don't need that many people to like your stuff to be successful. and get encouraged.
Organizer Jessica Bueller says about a dozen murals have been created so far, and that is just the beginning, because to her, anything can be a blank canvas.
So one of the ideas that we thought is that artists could paint different flower planters. So not just limiting it to walls, but also the planters for the flowers, the electrical boxes.
And while there was no theme for year one of the Loop Murals project, Dreamscapes will be the design choice for year two, which is right up Norm's alley.
A lot of the things I paint, I just want someone to feel like they can escape into. You know, each individual has lots of rough situations that they're experiencing that other people don't know about. And I've kind of heard the feedback that when people look at specifically the portals that I paint, they kind of feel a moment of escape or kind of like a little bit of a breath of fresh air.
With every stroke of the bow, every stroke of the brush, with every stroke of genius, the arts make life in St. Louis richer, not just emotionally, but also economically. In our region, the arts create $869 million a year in economic activity, supporting 12,000 jobs, generating $155 million for state and local governments, with more than 8 million annual arts-related visits. That's more than all St. Louis sporting events combined. Whether in a park, on a street, or a wall, experimental or a classic, the arts deserve our support, because the arts help support us. HEC Media is proud to be our region's home for arts, education, and culture. Because in St. Louis, the arts mean business.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. St. Louis has a rich and complex election history, reflecting the city's evolving political landscape from the 19th century to the present. Chris Gordon, MHS's Director of Library and Collections, explains.
Americans of all political persuasions can agree that voting is essential, and that exercising one's right to vote makes a difference. Still, how we've cast our ballots hasn't always looked the same. Voting laws and practices have evolved as our nation has evolved. In 1805, after the Louisiana Purchase brought the lands west of the Mississippi under the control of the United States, the territory of Louisiana was created as the first territorial government in Missouri. With the new government, the territorial legislature established our region's first democratic elections. This marked an important step in the development of democratic practices in the newly acquired territories. Then, with Missouri's admission to the Union in 1821, citizens could participate even more directly in selecting elected officials and adopting new laws. At this time, and for much of the 19th century, voting procedures were quite rudimentary. Voters used pre-printed ballots or pieces of paper which were marked and then dropped in a ballot box. Since illiteracy was widespread within the general population, these ballots often used symbols to help voters identify respective candidates, which is how we came to use the familiar elephant and mule symbols for Republicans and Democrats. After casting ballots, the count was determined by checking the number of names in the poll book against the number of ballots in the box. An election judge appointed by a local official recorded voter names in a poll book, and each voter had to swear an oath of eligibility. They had to attest that they fulfilled voting requirements, such as proving that their taxes had been paid and that they were U.S. citizens. Immigrants, for instance, were required to bring naturalization papers to verify their citizenship. We must still attest to citizenship and residency laws when we go to vote, but other early eligibility practices, such as property ownership, were dropped by the mid-19th century. Of course, only white males were allowed to vote prior to the passage of the 15th Amendment, which expanded that right to African American men in 1870. And finally, the 19th Amendment ensured the right to vote to women in 1920. Where we go to vote has also changed. Polling places in those early decades were often informal, located in taverns or a country store, sometimes a courthouse, and election days often had the feel of a celebration or a festival. In St. Louis, political parties might hold torch-lit parades and shoot off fireworks while waving banners that promoted their candidates. And of course, there was always plenty of alcohol for the thirsty. Candidates took advantage of the proximity of polling places to taverns to buy barrels of whiskey and cider to fill the glasses of potential voters. However, as the years progressed and attitudes changed towards mixing alcohol and political campaign practices, voting became much more solemn and voting laws became more standardized. A significant shift occurred in 1845 when federal law established a national election day on the first Tuesday in November. Before this new federal legislation, states were allowed to set their own presidential election days as long as they were held before the first Wednesday in December. Therefore, unlike modern elections, where we often see the results very soon after or on election night, you had to wait until all the states had voted, the votes were tallied and reported to Congress, and the winners were certified. It would have made for some very long watch parties. There have been a few examples of very problematic election days. For example, in St. Louis in August 1856, Election Day turned violent. Anti-immigrant nativist groups, fueled by fears of illegal voting by non-naturalized immigrants, attacked the homes of Irish and German immigrants, the newspaper offices of St. Louis's German language newspaper, and even St. Louis University, because it was a Catholic university and associated with Catholic immigrants. The violence was severe enough to involve the local militia, who were called in to control the streets after running gun battles erupted. Such conflicts were notable exceptions, though. Over time, more standardized balloting practices and new election laws helped to reduce confrontations. In 1914, the Missouri Supreme Court upheld a law prohibiting liquor sales and bars and nightclubs from opening on Election Day, reflecting the influence of the Prohibition movement. This decision aimed to prevent disruptions and ensure a sober electorate. In St. Louis, which wasn't much of a Prohibition town, these laws were still enforced. But the St. Louis Post-Dispatch lamented on election days, quote, "St. Louis became a Sahara." These liquor laws remained on the books in Missouri until well after Prohibition was over. It was in the 1980s that these Prohibition-era laws began to be relaxed and repealed. Fears surrounding potential disruption at polling places continued to be a concern, though. In 1932, amid the Great Depression, St. Louis city officials took measures to police polling places more rigorously. Officers were stationed at each polling place to discourage potential violence or disruptions. They were ordered to watch for concealed weapons, enforce laws against electioneering within 100 feet of the polls. Today it's within 25 feet of the polls. And they were instructed to, quote, "arrest all drunks." The one thing that hasn't changed is that it is important to remember that the right to vote is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. Each election is an opportunity to have your voice heard. Throughout history, Americans have cherished the right to vote. And on Election Day, we should emulate those who fought to uphold those rights and expand the right to vote to those who were originally disenfranchised on Election Day.
Next week on History Spotlight, a look at the history of Soldiers Memorial and Memorial Plaza.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org.
HEC Media, bringing you culture and community. Find all of HEC's positive programming and award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
Scott and Sharon Gedeke strongly feel that they have so many reasons to be thankful. Their daughters are dear to them. They have a life filled with family, love, happiness, and they even find ways to be grateful when facing serious health problems.
When we learned about the diagnosis, it's incredibly frightening. It made us even tighter and more appreciative of the relationship that we have, the five of us.
His diagnosis is a rare and complicated disease.
Scott has melanoma. It's an aggressive skin cancer that spreads to other parts of the body, and Scott's cancer is a rare type of melanoma.
It is not what many people think about on the skin. It's, mine happened to be, in my mouth, on the roof of my mouth. Particular diagnosis is rare and has been historically quite aggressive. Technology and the medicine really has advanced so much, even in a short period of time, even since I had my diagnosis. And I'm quite certain that if all that advancement hadn't happened in the last 10 years, I may have had the same outcome as what's in the literature about my condition, which is, median 9 months survival.
But now, outcomes look a whole lot different. It's been nearly 4 years since Scott's diagnosis, and this man is in his corner, giving Scott confidence and hope.
Very reassuring and had a real confidence about his thought process.
Dr. George Anastas. He's a Washington University physician and researcher at Siteman Cancer Center, based at Barnes Jewish Hospital and Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis.
So Mr. Gadegi, actually, he's a patient of mine with a type of melanoma, is the most aggressive and the rarest melanoma, called the mucosal melanoma. So that arises from the lining of the mouth or any part of your gastrointestinal tract.
Anastas is an associate professor of medicine at Washington University, and he's the leader of the Solid Tumor TIL therapy program at Siteman.
Solid tumors.
TIL is tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte therapy. Siteman Cancer Center is one of the first centers nationwide to offer TIL therapy for melanoma. This cell-based immunotherapy targeting melanoma is approved under accelerated approval regulations. The FDA gave Washington University physicians at Siteman Cancer Center that green light to give TIL therapy to certain patients with metastatic melanoma.
I was one of the pilot patients to get TIL therapy at Siteman.
And we're able to get these patients enrolled in a clinical trial because we have not had any other option for these patients. So the treatment is being approved for patients who fail all standard of care treatment. So these patients have no other option, knowing that there might be still good hope about this therapy. So till we know it does have about 30% chance to work on patients, while unfortunately the other 70% will not work. So what happened, your own immune system, especially the T cells, they do a killing effect. But sometimes they could be not fully energized, sometimes could be underpowered by number. There are only few ones, but they do part of the job, but they cannot kill the whole tumor. So TIL therapy actually came from that concept. So I would tell them, we need first to extract part of your tumor. We send that tumor to the company. The company will extract the residing T cells in the tumor. They just take them out. They populate them in a petri dish, and then we give it back to you in a piggyback, like blood transfusion, and see if these cells, when we empower them, they can do the job.
It's use your tumor to make your medicine. That's really like the bottom line.
On Scott's follow-up with Dr. Anastas, something happened that became so memorable.
He couldn't help but smile as soon as he walked in the door. And it was such an intense moment, really, because you just don't know what to anticipate. And his first words were, your scans looked great, you're a responder.
This is why Scott says he wanted to tell his story, because there is hope.
I want people to really understand that things like clinical trials, things like, trying, unapproved medications for your condition, if there are no other choices, that's a positive thing, and that something good can come out of it.
We have a faith in God's plan. We value and prioritize time together, but we really value minutes together. They all matter.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
Zoos are places of wonder, enabling humans to observe and connect with some of the most unusual species in the world. This face-to-face experience is meant to educate and inspire the public to value and protect the incredible animals they share the planet with. But for the keepers and curators, caring for the zoo's animals is only part of their job.
I'm very proud to say that zoos really do include in their mission as a central part the wildlife conservation in tandem with animal well-being and animal care.
Most of us, get into biology or get into the animal care field because we want to make a difference. We want to do good by the world and the natural spaces in it.
St. Louis Zoo, they were ahead of their time. I mean, they were doing this work late 1980s. And in fact, it was such a commitment that the curators formally have a quarter of their time dedicated to wildlife conservation centers.
In 2004, the St. Louis Zoo made its commitment to field conservation official by establishing the Wild Care Institute. With 16 centers and 13 programs based all over the world, the Institute works in tandem with other conservation organizations and, most importantly, the local community where the centers are based.
From the beginning, we've been cognizant that this is not only about wildlife, but also about people.
The Wild Care Institute Center for Conservation in the Horn of Africa partners with the Grevy Zebra Trust to not only preserve a critically endangered species, but also to educate and enable the people there to manage their conservation and continue research.
It was really inspiring to see. One of the things that we support over there is women working to restore and protect the grasslands to increase grazing opportunities for the zebras. One of the main reasons their population is in decline is grazing competition from livestock and human encroachment. So they are out there growing grassland and trying to help give them more grazing opportunities.
Every 2 years, staff from the St. Louis Zoo join others to travel to Kenya to participate in an intense census-taking effort called the Great Grevy Rally, which helps the locals gather information on how the Grevy zebra population is doing.
So during the rally, we go out in the field and we take pictures of the zebra's right side. Every zebra has a unique stripe pattern, so that is how we are able to identify them. When all the pictures are compiled, they will be put into a computer program where they can recognize their unique stripe patterns, and we'll do a census from those photos. The Wild Care Institute supported us going over to Kenya and doing the Grevy's rally, so people coming to the zoo and supporting the zoo supports that, which supports the conservation work going on over there.
But the Wild Care Institute also has centers much closer to home, like the one working to reintroduce the American burying beetle back into the state of Missouri and beyond. Once native to at least 35 states, as well as parts of Canada, the American burying beetle is a scavenger that depends on the meat of dead animals to survive. To bolster the dwindling population, the St. Louis Zoo has been breeding pairs for introduction back into the wild, providing the happy couple with dirt and a dead quail. The beetles create tunnels where they hide the food source and lay their eggs. Curator Kayla Garcia gave us a peek at one of the adults and into their unusual methods of breeding and raising young.
These beetles are really interesting because they're one of the few insect species that actually exhibit what we call biparental care. The babies, when they hatch, they're little grubs, kind of beg for food from the parents. They kind of make these little noises, and they both work together to keep their babies well fed. With that quail, they actually are able to preserve it with these special secretions that they produce to keep it from getting too rotten. Then once they get big enough that they start to crawl away, that's when mom and dad can kind of leave.
Beetles raised at the zoo are taken to a habitat in southwest Missouri, where a team, including Kayla, provides an initial food source and protection against fellow scavengers so they can raise young without interference.
These beetles do play a really important role in recycling nutrients. They're able to return minerals that are from decomposing animals back into the soil. I've always had like a particular fondness for our native wildlife, but what I find is that a lot of people don't necessarily realize just the diversity of life and the amazing animals that we have like in our own backyards.
Another North American Wild Care Institute center isn't actually located in North America, but in the Marianas Islands, which include the U.S. territory of Guam.
The St. Louis Zoo has been a long-time contributor to conservation of bird species in this region of the world. So Guam is the kind of big island in a chain of islands where the brown tree snake was accidentally introduced during World War II. The brown tree snake is kind of sneaky. It's nocturnal and they're arboreal, so they're climbing around in trees, but they're hiding a lot during the day. So it took a little time to realize that the snake was the issue that was kind of causing the population decline in the forest bird species on Guam. So it was biologically one of the most devastating ecological disasters. U.S. Fish and Wildlife decided that they needed to step in quickly to help preserve the species of Guam.
The Guam kingfisher was one of the first to receive focus. After capture, they were taken to several locations all over the world, including the St. Louis Zoo, and put into human care where they thrived. Now, decades later, there's a plan in motion to release some of that population back into the wild, but definitely not on Guam.
So unfortunately, the island of Guam is not yet safe for release there because the brown tree snake is still present. But it's really exciting to hopefully envision a future where they'll be out in the wild again at least, and no longer extinct in the wild, which is their current status.
And in case the brown tree snake is able to covertly hitch a ride to one of the neighboring islands like Saipan or Rota, another bird-saving technique is employed. This involves studying the various species patterns and territories, setting up nets to gently capture them, a short period of veterinary observation, and then translocation to another island in the chain, where they are released back into the wild. A top priority is providing the island community with ways to connect and assist with these conservation efforts.
We have field trips coming out to our field sites. We're getting to show students that maybe have never had an opportunity to be in their native forests, see their native species in hand, and really help make that community connection that is so critical.
So, besides supporting the zoo, what can the average St. Louisan do to help with these global conservation efforts?
Reduce, reuse, recycle. What you do with your garbage makes a tremendous impact on animals in the wild. Even just being cognizant about your energy. Climate change is imperiling so many species, but also policy, making sure that you vote for what's right for wildlife in the world.
And for zoo staff like Kayla, Jen, and Amanda, who get to be boots on the ground in the fight to protect and preserve wildlife, it's another way to share their own wonder and passion for animals, whether in the field or here at home.
To be physically engaged in conservation in this way is super fulfilling for me. Holding an endangered species in my hand and knowing I am directly contributing to the potential success of this conservation project is amazing.
Next week, the incredible story of D-Day to mark the 80th anniversary. Plus, the story of a man who served in the all-black 351st Artillery Unit. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.